is up, everybody? My name is James McCool. I am the owner of PaydirtDFS.com, and today is going to be another main slate breakdown. If you've not already checked out the site, go over to PaydirtDFS.com, go take a look at all the free research stuff, and if you want to grab a free membership, which is newer, we added a free membership, so if you grab that, you'll get 3 days free of full access to the site, all the models, everything that it has to offer. So if you haven't already checked that out, you should go do that, and if you have, then thank you for the support. We're going to do our normal weekly breakdown here of the NFL main slate. We're going to start with the worst games and then move to the best games, going by over-unders. We're going to talk about things like implied touchdown projections and pass rates and everything like that. We'll talk through the important plays of each game and the plays that you don't really need to care that much about, as well as go through any injuries and anything like that. The focus here is going to be mostly on building out stacks, but there's going to be a lot of different kind of stuff for one-offs as well. So usually this is a little bit of a longer video. Today we're going to try to make it a little bit of a shorter video so that it's easier to digest. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to be looking at this most of the video. Maybe we'll do a little bit of looking at the projections as well, but we're going to be paying mostly attention to the Vegas information. So the first game that we have here is going to be this Indianapolis and Washington game. This has an over-under of just 39. Both teams are going to combine for around 116 total plays. Indianapolis is a 3-point favorite here, implied to score 21 real-life points. Washington implied to score 18 real-life points. Indianapolis has a 70% adjusted pass rate, implied for 1.67 passing touchdowns and just 0.68 rushing touchdowns, whereas Washington, with a 56% adjusted pass rate, and applied for 1.1 passing touchdowns, 0.9 rushing touchdowns. So, I mean, this game is kind of interesting, mostly just because Matt Ryan was benched, so it's going to be Sam Ehlinger who's starting for Indianapolis, and then also on the Washington side, there's no more Carson Wentz. It is now Tyler Heineke. I think I pronounced that correctly. So, two backup quarterbacks. But Sam Ehlinger actually does have some upside. He has some rushing upside, and he actually does have like a pretty decent arm. So he projects pretty well. All things considered, an Indianapolis stack does not look bad. It only costs $15,800, just under $16K on DraftKings to put together, and it actually projects up there with Las Vegas and Seattle stacks. So the cost there is really, really nice. Cheapest stack that I think that you can really justify. It has the highest 5x percentage in the stats. Going with Ehlinger with Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce is a really nice way to start the slate and give you a lot of leeway to build out and fit all the other different pieces that you really want to have, like high upside wide receivers and everything like that. So Indianapolis makes a lot of sense here. On the Washington side, there's really not that much to like. We have no Jahan Dotson. Again, he's going to be out. So it's going to be, and no Cole Turner as well. So Logan Thomas is playing, Terry McLaurin is playing. Those guys are going to be the main options for this offense. The running back roulette is still going. Brian Robinson is getting the majority of the rushing work, but Antonio Gibson is being worked in plenty and probably has more upside overall. But all of that said, this is a pretty low game total. The reason why you can play Indianapolis is because they're so cheap, but I would stay away from the Washington side for the most part. So this next game, we have Tennessee and Houston. This is also just a 39 over-under, implied for 118 total plays. Houston is a 1-point favorite here with a 60% adjusted pass rate, implied for 1.45 passing touchdowns, 0.79 rushing touchdowns, whereas Tennessee, as a 1-point underdog, implied for 19 real-life points, 46% adjusted pass rate, implied for 1.16 passing touchdowns, and 0.97 rushing touchdowns. So another backup quarterback here is going to be starting for Tennessee. It's going to be Malik Willis, who is a big rushing threat, big dude who can run the ball quite a bit. So he may end up being relatively popular. The problem is that there's just so little upside for this Tennessee team. Their wide receivers are trash. Outside of Derrick Henry and Malik Willis, it's going to be hard to see them running the ball. Now, I think that Derrick Henry does allow them the upside to be able to actually move the ball and score some points here, but Malik Willis has significantly less upside, I think, than Sam Ehlinger for basically the same price. And you really can't stack Tennessee either. Malik Willis would have to be played with just one of Robert Woods or Nick Westbrook-Akine. And that's not really something that's super attractive. So I prefer the Indianapolis value QB rather than Malik Willis, but I think you can go either side. Both of them have rushing upside. Both of them obviously very cheap and allow you to do a lot of different things. On the Houston side, Dameon Pierce is doing really, really well this year, and he is pretty cheap, right? So he is a really good pivot. If you go and read the Chalk or Walk article that I put up on the site, which is free to read, of course, he is the direct pivot off of Tony Pollard. If you look at their projections next to each other, Tony Pollard projects for around 22, Dameon Pierce projects for around 20, but Pollard should be literally like 3 or 4 times higher owned than Dameon Pierce, and Dameon Pierce is getting an incredible workload no matter the game script. So it makes a lot of sense to go with Dameon Pierce as a direct pivot there, or playing them together. Dameon Pierce overall is just really good play. The only real injury note here is that Nico Collins is going to miss this game. So he's going to be out. It's just going to be mostly like Chris Moore and maybe a little bit more Chris Conley, but the Houston passing game is not something we care about much anyway. Next game, we have New England versus the New York Jets. New England are 2.5-point favorites here in an over-under of 40. They're projected to score 21.25 real-life points. They have a 51% adjusted pass rate, implied for 0.91 passing touchdowns, 1.47 rushing touchdowns. New York Jets, on the other hand, projected to score 18.75 real-life points, 52% adjusted pass rate, implied to score just 0.34 passing touchdowns with 1.76 rushing touchdowns. So the Jets are now missing Breece Hall. They went and picked up James Robinson, so they now have Michael Carter and James Robinson as their 1-2 punch. Big lean towards Michael Carter being the guy in this offense, and he's a very respectable running back. He's been really, really good as a secondary to Breece Hall and could absolutely be a starting running back on any team. So I think that he's likely the one that gets the majority of the workload here, but it's still going to be a split backfield. Outside of that, there is no Corey Davis in this game, so Elijah Moore will be playing, but there's really not much upside to this New York Jets passing game. On the New England side, Ramondre Stevenson and Damian Harris are going to continue to split work, with Ramondre Stevenson being the main back. He projects pretty well. Again, at 6,400, he projects pretty well and is right there with this large cohort of running backs. Like, you have Tony Pollard, Dameon Pierce, Ramondre Stevenson, Raheem Mostert, Eno Benjamin, and Kenneth Walker, all just like right there in terms of projections and all viable plays. So he just fits in right there. In terms of the passing game, you can't really stack that side because we don't know if it's going to be Mac Jones or Bailey Zappi finishing this game out. So there's really not that much to talk about in this game. You can play Ramondre Stevenson, but that's pretty much it. Michael Carter maybe if you want to get really feisty. On the next one, we have Atlanta versus Carolina. Atlanta is a 4-point favorite here in an over-under of 41. Their implied score 22.5 real-life points. They have an abysmal 43% adjusted pass rate. Implied score just 0.58 passing touchdowns and 1.94 rushing touchdowns. Whereas Carolina, 4-point underdogs here. Implied score 18.5 real-life points, 61% adjusted pass rate. Implied score 1.48 passing touchdowns and 0.59 rushing touchdowns. DJ Moore is chalk this week. He looks like one of the most popular wide receivers. After rerunning ownership this morning, he's still up there, right? Like, he's projected for about 19% ownership on DraftKings, and his projection is respectable. Like, I don't mind it. At 5,300, he looks fine. Again, though, I did talk about a pivot to him in the article, so you'll want to go read that as well. Overall, though, I'm not sure that we're ready to trust the Panthers yet. P.J. Walker looked good last week, but I don't know if he's going to continue to look good. And Atlanta grinds games down to an absolute halt. Like, this game should have... I have it projected for 117 total plays. It wouldn't surprise me if this game didn't surpass 110 total plays. It wouldn't surprise me if this game didn't surpass 105 total plays. Carolina was running at the slowest pace in the league before Matt Rule got fired, and I think it's going to continue to be slow. Atlanta just wants to run the ball. They showed that last week in an absolutely negative game script. They just continue to run the ball. So this game probably, the under on 41 looks really, really good. The under on 117 total plays looks really, really good. But outside of that, Chuba Hubbard is going to be out. They brought up Spencer Brown from the practice squad, but it looks like it's probably just going to be quite a bit of Dante Foreman and the two backups. I don't remember the other backup's name, but he doesn't really matter anyway. On the Atlanta side, Kyle Pitts looks like a pretty good play, all things considered. Tight end is an absolute just wasteland this week. Nobody projects above 12 fantasy points. But Kyle Pitts is up there. He only costs 4K. He does have upside. Like I said, though, they're just going to be running the ball pretty much the entire time. So, both Drake London and Kyle Pitts, while they are pretty good plays in terms of their market shares, their upside is severely capped by this offense. So there's really not much to talk about in this game either, unfortunately, but do be aware that if you play DJ Moore, he is very popular, and this game could have no plays ran. Next game, Philadelphia and Detroit. So Philadelphia, a 10.5 point favorite here with an over-under of 42. Or no, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, sorry. I said Detroit, meant Pittsburgh. Philadelphia, 10.5 point favorite, over-under 42. Implied score 26.25 real-life points with a 48% adjusted pass rate. Implied score 0.88 passing touchdowns and 2.06 rushing touchdowns. That is the most on the slate. Pittsburgh, 10.5 point underdog here. Implied score just 15.75 real-life points. 59% adjusted pass rate, implied for 1.03 passing touchdowns and 0.73 rushing touchdowns. So obviously Vegas does not have a lot of confidence in Kenny Pickett being able to play up against this Philadelphia defense, and Philadelphia's offense is still projected to be pretty good. I'm really low on Jalen Hurts, actually, in terms of projection, which is really interesting. I think that comes from the adjusted pass rate and maybe his adjusted rush rate being not actually all that high. I'm not sure. I am really low on Jalen Hurts compared to Vegas, though, so I might have to take some unders on his props. But for the most part, the thing that matters here in this game is actually going to be Miles Sanders. He's 6,600 and seems like a pretty decent play, all things considered, but that is relatively expensive when we have all of these other really good options in the 6K range. So you'll get Miles Sanders at basically no ownership on the team that's implied to score the most rushing touchdowns on the slate. That seems like a pretty good GPP play to me. Outside of him, if we go and look at the Philadelphia wide receivers, A.J. Brown projects low. Devontae Smith projects low. I think that, Dallas Goedert projects relatively low. I mean, I'm just low on this offense overall. On the other side of this, for Pittsburgh, Pat Freiermuth looks like a pretty decent play at 3,900, but he is going to be popular. Deontay Johnson looks like an okay play at 5,600. George Pickens looks like a pretty good play at 4,700. There's reasons to be on this Pittsburgh passing offense, mostly because they should be in a passing script most of this game, according to Vegas. So, I mean, I guess there are some interesting things in this game, but not that many. The thing that you mostly just want here is going to be the Philadelphia defense against Kyle Pickett and Miles Sanders. If you feel like taking a shot on him in GPPs, I think that's a great idea. Moving along, now we have Dallas versus Chicago. Dallas is a 10-point favorite here in a 42 over-under game. They are implied to score 26 real-life points. They have a 50% adjusted pass rate, implied for 1.36 passing touchdowns and 1.55 rushing touchdowns. Chicago is a 10-point underdog, implied to score 16 real-life points, 47% adjusted pass rate, implied for 0.61 passing touchdowns, 1.18 rushing touchdowns. Sorry, had to get some water. So this game is pretty interesting for the Chicago side. Chicago has been playing really, really well the last couple weeks, and Justin Fields has kind of been letting loose a little bit more. And he's been connecting really well with Darnell Mooney. They've been utilizing Khalil Herbert really, really well. So there's kind of a lot of things to like about Chicago from a value standpoint. Dallas is going to have no Ezekiel Elliott. That's the big news in this game. So Tony Pollard, I mean, in the 150 and in the Wildcat, he's likely going to be like 65% owned. No shit. Like, Tony Pollard is going to be in well over half of the lineups on this slate. just because everyone is going to talk about it, everyone is going to push him, everybody's going to tout him. So there's you have to make some decisions on chalk at that level. I do think that I am going to play him probably. Just as 6,100, I think that he's too cheap. But I have mentioned that there are pivots, including Dameon Pierce, who I think make a lot of sense in large field GPPs, where you can pass, I mean, 55% of the field probably in the Millie Maker, just by not having Tony Pollard. So there are things to think about there. Outside of Pollard, though, there's really not that much to talk about in this game. I don't think that you should actually stack Chicago. I do think that Darnell Mooney is a good play. Tony Pollard is obviously a good play. And if you want to stack Dallas, I guess you can. They do have the second highest implied team total here, 26.25, just behind Miami and tied with Minnesota. So the other way to really, really leverage Tony Pollard, if you don't want to do a indirect pivot to another running back in that price range, is by stacking Dallas, right? You can go with Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup, and end up with a pretty decent stack that has some upside in a team that is supposed to score the second most points on the slate. So that's another really, really good option for large field GPPs. But pretty much every single decision that you're going to make, and not only in regards to this game, but in regards to the slate, is going to be on Tony Pollard. Moving along, 42 over under here for the Rams versus San Francisco. San Francisco is a 1-point favorite, implied for 21.5 real life points, 62% adjusted pass rate, implied for 1.5 passing touchdowns and 0.9 rushing touchdowns. The Rams, basically the same, right? Implied for 20.5 team total, 67 adjusted pass rate, implied for 1.56 passing touchdowns, 0.73 rushing touchdowns. There's no Deebo Samuel for the 49ers this week. I think that that's going to mean that they're going to use Christian McCaffrey more as as a little bit of a slot receiver, I would guess. I think that Kyle Shanahan picked him up in order to do things like that. So I would think that a decent chunk of Deebo Samuel's role goes over to Christian McCaffrey. And I don't think that Christian McCaffrey is going to be owned at all this week. He's 8,700. I think people are likely still unsure of what his role in the offense is, but his upside is ridiculous here. And if you're willing to take a risk on Christian McCaffrey here in this spot, I think it can pay off really, really well in large field GPPs. There's enough value to make it happen, and I think that it just makes a lot of sense. So he's a really interesting play. Outside of that, George Kittle projects as the highest projected overall tight end on the slate. There's reasons to go with San Francisco options here. The Rams, Cooper Kupp is obviously Cooper Kupp, projects exceptionally well, should be low owned because he's really expensive. And there's a lot of other options that project well and can be used rather than somebody that expensive. There's no Cam Akers here, so it's going to be mostly Darrell Henderson playing, but he projects pretty badly, and Malcolm Brown still exists. So really the best play in this game is going to be Christian McCaffrey. If you want to go with George Kittle, I won't fight you on that either. I think he's a pretty good play as well. But overall, not a whole lot to talk about in this game. Next one. All right, now we're getting into the decent totals. So we have the New York Giants versus Seattle. Seattle 3-point favorite here, implied to score 23.5 real life points. 52% adjusted pass rate, implied for 1.38 passing touchdowns, 1.25 rushing touchdowns. The Giants, on the other hand, implied for 20.5 real life points, 49% adjusted pass rate, implied for 0.8 rushing or passing touchdowns, 1.49 rushing touchdowns. News for the New York Giants, Kadarius Toney got traded to the Chiefs. I'm not sure that actually matters this year, but people are excited about it. And who is it? Chris Bellinger? Did I say that right? I don't remember if his first name is Chris, but their tight end got injured, so they're going to have backup tight ends in this game. The news for Seattle is that DK Metcalf had a partially torn patellar tendon and is going to play. I don't think you should play DK Metcalf. I actually don't think you should stack Seattle in general. Maybe do some one-offs of Tyler Lockett or Marquise Goodwin, but I wouldn't touch DK Metcalf trying to play on a partially torn patellar tendon. That just seems like a fucking stupid idea. I wouldn't do that. The other thing here is going to be Kenneth Walker, and Kenneth Walker projects well. he's, again, in that range of like $6K to $6,500 running backs. Projects for about 16 fantasy points. Should be very popular. Obviously, a good play. The Giants have been pretty good at maintaining ball control, but not really good at preventing the rush for the most part. So there's reasons to like Kenneth Walker a lot. You can pretty much just round robin any of these 6K running backs, and you're going to be fine. But Kenneth Walker is certainly a good spot. I wouldn't stack either one of these teams. Daniel Jones has been rushing a lot. Saquon Barkley is a good play overall at 8,100. There's pieces to like in this game. I just wouldn't stack it, but I do think there's a really, really good source of a lot of different one-offs. Okay, 49 over under here for Minnesota and Arizona. This game is projected to be pretty good. So Minnesota 3.5 point favorite here, implied for 26.25 real life points. 67% adjusted pass rate, 1.8 implied passing touchdowns, 1.14 implied rushing touchdowns. Arizona 3.5 point underdogs here, implied for 22.75 real life points, 57% adjusted pass rate, 1.02 passing touchdowns, and 1.52 rushing touchdowns. Main news here is that James Conner is going to miss another week, so we're going to have Eno Benjamin running again. Darrell Williams is a game time decision, so that'll depend on if you want to play any Keontae Ingram or not. It should be running back roulette for Arizona if Darrell Williams is active. If not, then you can feel free to play Eno Benjamin, who again projects pretty well, 6K on DraftKings. Outside of that, Minnesota is pretty much completely healthy. Minnesota stacks look really, really good in terms of the stack projections over in the models on the site, which, again, if you get a free membership over at paydirtdfs.com, you'll get full access to the models for 3 days. So you can go check that out. Justin Jefferson projects as a really, really good play overall. Projects his third highest overall projection on the slate. He is 9,100, so you're going to pay a price for him, but we've talked about some really cheap stacks that you can make to make that kind of thing happen. Pair him up with either Adam Thielen or Irv Smith Jr., and I think that you have a pretty good Minnesota stack that you can run. DeAndre Hopkins looked incredible in his debut last week. He's only 7,400. He had like 45% of the targets or something insane last week. I don't think he's going to continue to have 45% target share, but I do think he's going to be, in the Devontae Adams like realm, right? He's going to be like 35 to 40% targets. He might be Cooper Kupp-esque. He's a really, really good play. 7,400. I just think that price is really, really silly for what his workload should be. So this is probably my favorite stack on the slate. If you can afford it, I think that at the very least, if you can make a DeAndre Hopkins and Justin Jefferson mini stack, mini correlation in like a cheaper stack, I think that's like the best route that you can take on the slate. Really, really good game. I could talk about the running backs, but I never really like, models never really like, I don't even remember his name anymore. Dalvin Cook? Yeah, models don't really like Dalvin Cook all that much. He's okay, but he's too expensive. Like, he should be like 6,500 with these guys in this range, and he's 7,600, and I just don't want to play that. And then on the other side, like I said, Eno Benjamin, pretty decent play. Another 49 over under here. We have Las Vegas versus New Orleans. Las Vegas is a 1.5 point favorite here, implied score 25.25. They have a 52% adjusted pass rate, implied for 1.07 passing touchdowns, 1.75 rushing touchdowns. New Orleans, on the other hand, implied for 23.75 real life points, 49% adjusted pass rate, 1.36 implied passing touchdowns, 1.3 implied rushing touchdowns. So many injuries in this game. New Orleans still does not have Michael Thomas or Jarvis Landry, so it's going to continue to be the Chris Olave show with some Juwan Johnson on the back end. And they do have Alvin Kamara as well, so that'll pretty much be their offense. It's just Alvin Kamara and Chris Olave, along with some support to help Andy Dalton. On the Las Vegas side, Devontae Adams questionable, Matt Collins questionable, Hunter Renfrow questionable, and Darren Waller is questionable. So I think that all of them play, but like there are just so many questionables and so many things to consider in this game. Outside of that, Josh Jacobs projects incredibly well. His workload has been insane the last like 5 weeks. He projects as the best overall player on the slate, and it's really not close. On the other side of that, Alvin Kamara, obviously a very strong option at 7,100. He is also well in play in that mid-range running backs like roulette. You can play pretty much any running back you want this week. They all project really, really well. Devontae Adams projects okay, but not incredibly well, right? Like for 8,600, you have guys like DeAndre Hopkins above him at 7,400. You have Amon-Ra St. Brown above him at 6,900. You have Tyreek Hill above him at the same price. So Devontae Adams, at his price, probably makes a really, really good GPP play for large field stuff just because he's going to be so low owned. Like, nobody's going to want to pay that price for that production. So he's a really, really interesting option in large field GPPs. But for the most part, you don't really need to question mark this. It's just Josh Jacobs and Alvin Kamara and Chris Olave. Like, those are really the plays that you care about in this game. This game is worth stacking. If you wanted to stack the Las Vegas side to fade Josh Jacobs ownership, I think that's a really interesting angle in large field GPPs. You could also do some mini stacks. You could do Alvin Kamara versus Josh Jacobs. You could do Josh Jacobs versus Chris Olave. Like, it's pretty much going to center around Josh Jacobs, though. That's where most of your decisions are coming from this game. All right, last game on the slate, we have Miami versus Detroit. Miami is a 3.5-point favorite here, implied for the highest team total on the slate of 27.25. 63% adjusted pass rate, implied for 1.87 passing touchdowns, 1.18 rushing touchdowns. Detroit is implied for 23.75 real life points, implied 53% adjusted pass rate, implied for 1.97 passing touchdowns, most on the slate, and 0.69 rushing touchdowns. Very nice rushing touchdown total there. Detroit is going to go way under owned here, and that's pretty interesting because Miami is going to be the highest owned stack on the slate, right? You have Miami projected with Tua, Tyreek, and Jalen Waddle for a predicted ownership of around 50% overall on that stack by itself. And then on the Detroit side, you have Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and TJ Hawkinson projected for half of that at about 24% ownership. So a lot of things to like for the Detroit side of things here. And they're just a really, really good home team. They play way better at home. This game is going to be really popular, and I think you can gain quite a bit of edge on the field by just stacking up on the Jared Goff side rather than the Miami side. Both teams project well. It's not like Detroit projects exceptionally bad in terms of its comparison to Miami. And really with Miami, like the projection that you want is Tyreek Hill. So going with a Detroit stack and bringing back Tyreek Hill, very likely something that I think you should be aiming to do. Outside of that, let's see. So we have no DJ Chark for Detroit, and we do have Amon-Ra St. Brown, who has cleared the concussion protocol. We have DeAndre Swift back, so that knocks down Jamal Williams. For Miami, we have Tua and Tyreek and Jalen Waddle all healthy, and Raheem Mostert, who is getting plenty of work. So there's a lot of ways you can attack this game, man. You can use pretty much any player that you want, any combination of players that you want. It's the highest overall total on the slate. It's the highest over-under. There's just a lot of things to like. I prefer the Detroit passing side because I think that it gives you a lot more money to work with as well. So that's likely going to be my angle for that one. All right, so what did we talk about? The top stacks here are likely going to be Miami, Detroit, Minnesota, and Indianapolis, along with maybe some Las Vegas or some New Orleans if you wanted to go that way as well. There are a lot of things that you have to make decisions on, but the main thing that you're going to be making decisions on is whether you want to play Tony Pollard or not. If you do play him, you have to be reticent of the ownership of the rest of your lineup in larger fields, whereas in smaller fields, you can likely just build mostly optimally, especially if you're using the models over at Paydirt. There are a couple guys there that you're going to get in your optimals that are going to differentiate you from the field anyway. So if you have not already gone and checked out the Chalk or Walk article, it's a new article that I put up this week that's discussing popular plays and their pivots. Included some high-owned players there and some good pivots that you could make off of them. So go check that out. And like I said, go get a membership over at PaydirtDFS.com. NBA models have been fantastic to start the season. NHL models have been strong. NFL models always strong. We get esports back here pretty soon. Lots of really, really cool things going on over there. So thank you so much for the support. Again, my name is James McCool, and I hope that you follow, subscribe, and do all of those things that you should do on YouTube. Thanks again.